Beetle.
Sorry.
So that's all right. You know, he killed people for calling him Bugsy.
Right.
In the movie and in real life, he despised that nickname that he got. You know, so other than that, I think he might have felt somewhat flattered by the portrayal in the movie. He was definitely a vain man, right?
How did he get the name Bugsy?
Well, because he was crazy as a bug, right?
Right.
Crazy as a bed bug, right? You heard that phrase. So I mean, that's definitely where it comes from. And so and why he disliked it so much, because he certainly didn't think of himself as being crazy. Although I'd say the movie does a fairly good you know, he has what I think now is called borderline personality disorder. In the past, the term was more manic depressive. He seems to have fit that profile, as, by the way, did Virginia Hill. So the movie doesn't really portray that in either of them so clearly, but I think in real life they both suffered from a similar affliction in that sense. This movie is based on a book called We Only Kill Each Other, The Life and Bad Times of Bugsy Siegel, by a guy named Dan Jennings. And as far back as 1984, Warren Beatty was thinking about turning it into a movie. So it was 7 years from the time he acquired the rights to the book until they actually made the film. To put this movie into a little bit of context, you know, there were some movies about Jewish gangsters going all the way back to maybe the 1950s. There certainly are some Jewish gangsters, right? I don't have to tell you the history, right? Meyer Lansky, who's portrayed in this film, you know, was the architect in many ways of what we come to think of as organized crime today. There's a movie I think goes back to 1960 called Murder Incorporated, which was that was Meyer Lansky's original concept, right? I mean, it was the idea of hitmen for hire, right? Of you know, was innovative in its time. Rather than murder being personal, he turned it into business. Right. So you need somebody killed, you hire us. That way there's no motive, there's no murder weapon, there's no, you know, somebody slips into town from somewhere else, does the murder and disappears. Right. So which is possibly the reason for the title of the book about Bugsy Siegel, We Only Kill Each Other. Is really about, you know, these mob hits that Murder Incorporated become famous for. So there was a movie going back to 1960, but it really doesn't talk about the Jewishness of anybody in that movie. So the watershed in terms of Jewish gangsters on film who are actually and obviously Jewish, I would say, is The Godfather Part 2, which comes out in 1974. Right, and has Lee Strasberg playing the part of the old man who is a Jewish gangster living on Miami Beach. Who honestly, when I saw that movie, I noticed the attention to detail is that he dressed just like my Jewish father on Miami Beach. You know, it's you know, the way he sat in a chair and things is clearly. Had been observing what people look like. Lee Strasberg, I'm not in this movie. Someday we'll talk about him, one of the great acting coaches in history. I mean, a little bit more controversial these days than he was then, but didn't actually do much acting on screen himself until late in life. But he did. So in 1974, in The Godfather Part 2, there's this part of the Jewish gangster based on Meyer Lansky, who my sister's on this call too. She'll well remember that Meyer Lansky holed up for the last years of his life in Miami Beach. He built a hospital so that he could live on its top floor and not be put on trial because he was too sick to stand trial. So the Miami Beach Heart Institute, which is no longer there, but for a little while there was a pretty good hospital that that he built, not out of the altruism, but more out of a sense of he needed a place of refuge. So he also used the state of Israel that way for a while. He went and lived in Israel to avoid extradition back to the United States to stand on trial. It was, I believe, if I remember the chronology right, after he was extradited and sent back to America, that he was too sick to go to trial and spent the rest of his life on the penthouse floor of the hospital that he built. So so that movie 1974 is the watershed, and after that there are a series of movies about Jewish gangsters. I mean, the next one, 1975, right after Godfather Part 2, is called Lepke, about Leo Lepke Buckhalter, who was also part of Murder Incorporated. And that movie from 75 starred Tony Curtis. Sergio Leone, the famed Italian director who made spaghetti westerns like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in the 1960s, made a movie in 1984 called Once Upon a Time in America, which retells the story of the start of these guys, of Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano. And recognizes the Jewishness of the Jewish characters in it. The same year that this movie came out, 1991, there's another movie that features Bugsy Siegel called Mobsters, about the young Siegel and Lansky, right? And also a movie called The Marrying Man, in which Bugsy Siegel is a character in the movie. Around the same time, Billy Bathgate, I think the year before, has Dustin Hoffman as Dutch Schultz, another Jewish mobster, right? So we have a string of these movies with Jewish gangsters. One of my favorites is the Coen brothers made a movie about gangsters in general that has some Jewish characters in it as well, called Miller's Crossing, which I'm a big fan of the Coens. So that one's fun. And a few years after this, you get Robert De Niro in the movie Casino, which is also like this movie about the rise of Las Vegas. He's playing a character in that movie, Lefty Rosenthal, who another Jewish mobster, right? And if you go back to the first Godfather, even before, in 1972, even before the Lee Strasberg role, you've got Mo Green in the first one, right? So it seems like Francis Ford Coppola sort of took the lid off of the Jewish gangster story in Hollywood, and from that time on, it's become very common. And in fact, probably these days, if you make any sort of historical organized crime movie, there's going to be at least some Jewish gangsters in it, right? And they certainly existed, right? I officiated at a funeral a number of years ago for a guy who, when I went to visit the family, they told me he was a nice man, a great man. Don't listen to what anybody else says. Yeah. And a couple of years after that funeral, there was actually a book that came out about Jewish gangsters, which suggested, among other things, that it was a sham funeral, that they pointed to it being a closed casket, which of course is very common in Jewish tradition, but the person who wrote the book didn't realize that. So thought the closed casket was because there wasn't really a body inside, right? So I'm pretty sure that that was not the case. So anyway, so there have been plenty of movies documenting the role of Jews in organized crime, and just as Jews are overrepresented by our percentages in the American population in the film industry, which we talk about pretty much every week, how we're overrepresented, we're a little bit overrepresented in organized crime as well as in academia and Nobel Prize winners and a lot of other things. So you got to take the good with the bad when it comes to this stuff. So. So as I said, Warren Beatty acquired the rights to this book back in 1984 and hired James Toback to write a script based on it. Toback had written a couple of other movies by this time. Let me see, I think I have a note on him somewhere. I'm not seeing it. He's become a little bit of a persona non grata actually in recent years because he's been in part of the Me Too issue. There have been some accusations about him. Yeah, in 1974 he wrote a movie called The Gambler, which is not so much about organized crime, but it is about a Jewish gambler in debt. Played by James Caan in the movie. And often as a director and also as a writer, he writes about gambling and danger, sex and death. So the things that this movie is all about. So Beatty asked him to write a script. He wrote a script. Beatty turned down that script. He ended up writing 25 drafts of Bugsy before Warren Beatty, who was the producer of the movie, was satisfied, and they started to make the movie. Warren Beatty, I don't know if anyone is under the misapprehension that Warren Beatty is Jewish. I mean, there are some people who think that Warren Beatty is Jewish. If you go online, there's some anti-Semitic stuff about Warren Beatty being Jewish, but he's not. And of course, his sister is Shirley MacLaine. The two of them are the children of teachers. And, some of you may remember that he got his start in television in the first couple of seasons of The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, playing a regular role there as a high school student, and then going out to Hollywood and starting, I think, 1961, Splendor in the Grass with Natalie Wood. He becomes a bankable Hollywood star, but his ambition is much greater than that. I mean, even in the early days, I mean, he actually says that he worked with great directors as an actor so that he could learn the craft, so that he could become the producer, writer, director, and star of movies. And in fact, it's accomplished something that nobody else ever has. He's the only person to be nominated as an actor, director, producer, and writer of the same film for the Oscars. And he's actually done it twice. So Heaven Can Wait and
Kevin
Red.
Costner for Dances with Wolves?
I'm pretty sure not, because I don't think he was nominated in the writing category.
Oh, okay.
I think, but you can check me. But I'm pretty sure about it. And as I said, Beatty's done it twice. He's been nominated for 15 Oscars over the course of his career. He's only won one, I think. I mean, he won one for directing Reds. But he hasn't won as an actor, as producer of a Best Picture. He's been nominated 4 times as an actor, 4 times as producer of a Best Picture nominee, 4 times for his contributions to a screenplay, and 2 times for Best Director. So he was born in 1937. He produced 8 films, I think, and those 8 films have been nominated for 53 Oscars. So I mean, it's kind of remarkable, right? So he starting in 1967, he's both producer and star. Produced and starred in Bonnie and Clyde in 1967. A film that's notable for a lot of reasons, but one of my favorites is that it's Gene Wilder's screen debut is actually in Bonnie and Clyde. So Bugsy, this movie was nominated, I think, for 10 Oscars. It only won 2. It had the misfortune of coming out the same year as Silence of the Lambs, which took all the major categories that year. I think actor and actress, director, and Best Picture, I think, which, if memory serves on that, it was one of the first since there's only a couple of movies that have swept the Oscars like that. It Happened One Night was the first one. Then I think maybe One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest did as well. Not sure if did the actress who played Nurse Ratched win Best Actress?
I think she definitely won because she signed to her deaf parents, which is
Okay.
but I wonder if it wasn't for Best Supporting, and I'll Google it.
I don't remember. So at any rate, so Warren Beatty's had quite a career. So of course the other star of this movie, Annette Bening, eventually she and Warren Beatty have been married since they were together for a long time before they got married. And of course, Warren Beatty is a famous playboy before this, but appears to be happily married to Annette Bening. She was not nominated for an Oscar for this movie, which I think it's a pretty great performance, I think. And the actresses that year who were nominated were Jodie Foster, who won, I think, for Silence of the Lambs, Gina Davis and Susan Sarandon for Thelma and Louise were both nominated in the Best Actress category. And then Bette Midler, who we saw last week, was nominated for the Boys that year, and Laura Dern for one of her early roles in a movie called Rambling Rose. So Annette Bening was shut out here. She has been nominated, I think, 4 times for the Oscar, starting with The Grifters, the movie she made before this one in 1990, and then later for American Beauty, Being Julia, and The Kids Are All Right. So, very good actress, and stands toe to toe with Warren Beatty in this movie throughout. 2, I think, very good performances in roles that are not simple, right? I mean, I think these are complicated characters, and there are moments in this movie where I just look at her eyes, and there's a lot that registers in her eyes without saying a word of dialogue or really much movement at all. Quite remarkable, I think. Harvey Keitel is in the movie as well. So here we have an example of a Jewish actor playing a Jewish gangster. So Harvey Keitel was born in New York City, the son of Jewish immigrants. And from early on in his career, of course, he was very connected with Martin Scorsese, right from Scorsese's very first movie, which was called Who's That Knocking at My Door? But then the breakthrough role for both probably Harvey Keitel and Robert De Niro is Mean Streets. But he also plays roles in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore and Taxi Driver Taxi Driver was written by a guy named Paul Schrader, which then leads to another kind of a connection between Schrader and Harvey Keitel. He actually stars in a movie written and directed by the screenwriter of this, James Toback, called Fingers, where he plays a Jewish criminal as well. So,
And who does he portray?
so he's Mickey Cohen in
Mickey
this movie, right? Who before he ends up working for Bugsy Siegel, is sort of considered to be a one-man gang out in California, right? So, and was probably at least as crazy as Benjamin Siegel, right? So so he was nominated for his work in this movie as Best Supporting Actor for his portrayal of Mickey Cohen here. Right? So Ben Kingsley, of course, is in the movie playing Meyer Lansky. So again, there are some people who want to claim Ben Kingsley as a Jewish actor. He himself disavows that. So there may be some distant Jewish heritage in Ben Kingsley, but there are other parts of his heritage and his faith tradition are definitely not Jewish. Right? Of course, he's well known for becomes a big star for Gandhi, in 1982, and wins the Oscar for that. He is nominated in the same category as Harvey Keitel for this movie as Best Supporting Actor, playing Meyer Lansky here. And he was nominated a couple of more times for Oscars for the movie Sexy Beast in the year 2000, 2003 for The House of Sand and Fog. So,
what about Schindler's List? He wasn't nominated for that?
He was not. So, but of course, that's where we've seen him before in our movie classics, looking at this. I think this is the first time we're seeing Elliot Gould in one of our Jewish classics, but a Jewish actor here also playing a Jewish criminal. We saw a Paul Mazursky movie last week. I mentioned that Paul Mazursky's first big hit in Hollywood was Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, which Elliot Gould plays a major role in that in 1969. He's actually Oscar nominated that year for Best Supporting Actor for that movie. And then in 1970, he begins a long-established relationship with the director Robert Altman, and co-stars in MASH, The Long Goodbye, and California Split. He even appears as himself in the movie Nashville by Altman. And of course, in more recent years, you may know him from the Ocean's 11, 12, 13 movies that he's in. And he's played some recurring roles on television in recent years as well, including in the TV show Ray Donovan, where he's kind of the father figure to the character Ray Donovan before he dies in the show. He also has a recurring role in the TV series Friends, where he plays Monica and Ross's father. So he was born in Brooklyn in 1938. Got his start on Broadway. He was in I Can Get It For You Wholesale in 1962, which is, I believe, where and when he met Barbra Streisand, and they were married for a time. So in some of the couple of smaller roles are worth mentioning, just Bebe Neuwirth plays a small role in here as the Austrian Countess. So you may know her better from the TV series Cheers and Frasier, where she plays Frasier's wife, Lilith Crane. And then better known for her stage work. She was star of the revival of Sweet Charity in the 1980s and won a Tony for that. And she was in the original cast of the revival of Chicago in 1994. So she's also starred on Broadway in the Addams Family musical as Morticia Addams. So a number of different things. Joe Montana, who plays George in this character, in the credits they just call him George, but I'm not sure if there was some legal issue there, but he's playing George Raft, the movie star who indeed was in fact a childhood friend of Meyer Lansky and Ben Siegel. So the idea that Ben would go out and visit George makes sense, and in fact is what happened in real life. And so Joe Montana, the actor, was born in Chicago, so hometown boy, 1947. He made his debut here in plays on screen. We'll see him in a starring role next week in the movie Homicide. So he's had a long career with the writer and director of that movie, David Mamet, on stage and on screen. On screen, he was in House of Games and the movie we'll watch for next week, Homicide. On stage, he's been in a lot of different Mamet works. And of course, Mamet got his start here in Chicago too, and some of those plays have their debuts here in Chicago before they go on to Broadway. Joe Montana's debut here in Chicago was in the cast of Hair in the Chicago version in 1969. So,
Rabbi?
Yes.
Joe Montana also lived in Northbrook for years. His mother still lives here, and his brother Ron Montana is well known here in the area at the North Shore Senior Center, and
Great.
Wonderful family.
Yeah. He's very good. I think an underrated actor in some ways. We can talk about him much more next week. So just mentioned Bill Graham in the cast, another Jewish actor in the cast. So, but not really known for being an actor. I mean, he's much better known as a concert promoter. I mean, he owned the Fillmore in San Francisco at one point in his career, and booked all of those great rock and roll acts into the Fillmore. I actually died in a helicopter crash the year this movie was released. He plays Luciano in the movie, but he is born in Germany, actually, a Jewish family. They moved to France in 1939. He got to America in an exchange of orphans, which is kind of a bizarre thing, but Jewish sent to America in exchange for Christian orphans being sent to France. So that's how Bill Graham came to America. And so he grew up, in a foster home in the Bronx with a Jewish family there. He went on to serve in the U.S. Army in the Korean War. He got a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart, moved to San Francisco, and started out in this concert promoting business. He leased the Fillmore Auditorium. Later, it became Fillmore Events. And I've forgotten the name of the company now, but it's the biggest booker of rock concerts in the country now. I think Live Nation, I think it's called.
Live Nation, yeah.
Yeah. So, and as I said, died in a helicopter crash in 1991. So you may have noticed just in passing Wendy Malick. She's only got maybe a line coming off a train as clearly a lover that Ben takes on the train And so Wendy Malick's best known for her appearances on television. I mean, she was in the cast of the TV series Just Shoot Me and Hot in Cleveland, right? So so if her face looked familiar, it might be from television. So so that's some of the actors and producers and things like that of Bugsy. So you know, it's a very interesting film. I think it's this movie and the one that I've paired it with, Homicide Next Week. I mean, one of the things they have in common is uncommonly quick dialogue, constant conversation. There's not a lot of quiet in either one of these movies. A brief moment here or there, but it goes by fast. You know, there's a lot of some of it sort of stylized 1940s like snappy dialogue in this movie. I mean, I think particularly of the moment where he meets Virginia Hill and they go back and forth a bit. And I think that that's one of the keys to sort of reading this text and understanding this movie, is that it's a modern gangster movie made in the 1990s that uses the techniques of the gangster movies of the 1930s and 40s. So right down to some of the editing techniques. I don't think I even mentioned the director, Barry Levinson, right? So Jewish director. This is the year after he makes the movie Avalon, right? So, which, by the way, you know, we talked about this a little bit last week. He makes the movie Avalon about a Jewish immigrant family and doesn't mention their Jewishness at all in the movie. And he got a little bit of pushback from people, you know, why didn't you say that these characters were Jews? Things like that. Did you notice that the word Jew is only used once in the movie Bugsy? I mean, clearly is about Jewish gangsters, but the word Jew only appears one time. Did anyone catch it? So did you catch it? When did they use the word Jew?
Yeah, you know, I can't remember exactly when, but I think when he worries so much about the effects of the Holocaust, it gives away the fact that he was Jewish.
Well, it certainly does. Yeah. But that's exactly where it comes up too, is when he says that he talks about Hitler and Mussolini trying to bump off all the Jews of Europe.
Right. And and that's the one thing he's really concerned about, that shows somewhat of his humanity.
Right. Yeah, he really does seem to, and this is not just made up for the movie. He seems to be trying to create a plan where he's going to go to Italy and kill Mussolini. Right. Right. You know, I mean, it's delusional.
Right.
You know,
and he gets mad when someone else does it first.
That's right. You know, when he tells Meyer Lansky that he's planning to do this, Meyer says, "Do not say this to anybody else." Right? Because it's delusional, and Meyer Lansky recognizes, right? I mean, that's how they play these two characters that you know, Bugsy really is crazy, right? I mean, and you know, and to you know, he has and had probably in real life a kind of a death wish, right? Which certainly, you know, maybe it's not completely implausible that somehow Benjamin Siegel could get an audience with Mussolini, but shooting Mussolini and leaving, maybe not so likely, right? You know, so it's unquestionably delusional, but it was something that he really felt. And by the way, I mean, we can mention as we talk about this that Meyer Lansky himself was certainly concerned about the Jews of Europe during the Holocaust, and was instrumental in the birth of the state of Israel in terms of running weapons to the Haganah, you know, and so and other things like lights for landing strips and things like that. So the Jews of organized crime in America actually helped give birth to the state of Israel. So you know, this movie, I think, is an attempt to humanize Ben Siegel, right? And so that we shouldn't only come away with him a thought of him as a bloodthirsty killer. The movie makes him likable in a way. He snaps occasionally. So we see the craziness, can think about the first scenes of the movie where the credits themselves are actually punctuated with Siegel going into a men's haberdashery, buying fancy shirts and ties, and being complimented on his taste and all of that stuff. And then, of course, we find out that the reason that he's buying these things is not for him. He brings them into this gangster, using them and uses them purely as a prop. You want the shirt off my back, right? And gives them the shirts and the ties, then shoots them, So the antithesis of the Murder Incorporated idea, right, where murder is not personal. Ben Siegel didn't get that memo from Meyer Lansky. The way to get away with murder is to have it not be personal. So the movie does, I think, humanize him. I was starting to say that it really takes his life and turns it into cinematic art, right? Using the film language of the 1930s and 40s. Some of there are conventions of film editing, right, that often go by for us sort of unnoticed, but the dissolve, for example, right, where one picture sort of fades out and another one fades up, right, is one of the conventions of movie editing. The truth is, in most modern movies, you don't see it very much anymore, right? But in the 1930s and 40s, you saw it all the time, right? Even more so, a technique it's called in movie making the hard-edged wipe, where one scene gets sort of wiped off the screen as another scene comes up, right? Again, something that's sort of out of fashion in modern day editing. The modern experience of editing is more these kind of quick cuts, right, from one thing to another. The old style called attention to the editing itself. So you see that in this movie. So I think it's a very conscious effort by, I will say, Beatty as producer, Barry Levinson as director, to sort of take those movies from the 30s and 40s, bring them into the 90s, and use those techniques, And so when there's that kind of snappy dialogue, right, between Ben and Virginia when they meet, that sounds like something Jimmy Cagney might say to Carol Lombard, right? That's very deliberate. So let's add James Toback, the screenwriter, into that too. This is not about creating naturalistic dialogue that sounds the way people actually talk. I'm not sure that this movie sounds at all the way people actually talk, whether it was back in the 30s and 40s or now, So I think that's quite deliberate, and part of it is this sort of turning the gangster's life into art, right? A reference to all of the old movies about gangsters. But I think in the end, it's a tragedy, right? I mean, it's not that Ben Siegel is uneducated or unable. He has this vision about Las Vegas. To be fair, I mean, some of this is fictionalized. I mean, the Flamingo was actually already under construction when Ben Siegel took it over. So he's not the one who first saw the potential of Las Vegas, but certainly within the movie, that's he is a man with a vision, right, with a plan. And the closing credits, tell us how much money Las Vegas has made, which, by the way, has got to be one of the in some ways, for me, one of the least satisfying, end credits, right, of a movie. A lot of times we see these movies and they tell us at the end about the real person and what the real person is doing now and those kinds of things, right? So to hear that Las Vegas has made billions of dollars on its original investment seems more deplorable than the happy ending, right? But it is it's significant that the vision pays off, even though it's the vision that gets him killed, right? So it also, of course, is something of a tragic love story. So in his love for Virginia, which she gives up millions of dollars to be with him, right, in the end. So and then of course he's shot and killed. So the movie ends with broken families, wasted lives, right, and nothing to show for it except Las Vegas, right, which maybe isn't nothing. Although, as somebody said to me, there isn't even a statue of Ben Siegel in Las Vegas, right? So the movie is sort of in some sense does want us to sympathize with him, does want to give us a sense that there was something there besides the brute, right? And then there are just some lovely touches for the movie, I think. One of my favorites is the screen test, which I think is not invented. I think that actually happened. But the fact that the guy who is a gangster in real life could not convincingly play a gangster in a screen test is a kind of a lovely irony that the movie shows. And then to have it be what he's actually watching when he gets killed, it's sort of a metaphor for his own inadequacy. So I think it's quite elegant in its construction. So a testament to the creative abilities of all the people who worked on this film, which in some ways is more of a monument than Las Vegas is to this. I was thinking as I watched it of Benjamin Siegel as the wandering Jew, the desire to actually have a place to call your own, to have a home, to build something, to make something that lasts. I mean, all of that in the end eludes him. And so it's, he's in the movie, he's a victim of forces that are beyond his control, ultimately. Forces maybe that are, to some extent, he brings upon himself, but forces that he also can't do anything about, So I'm interested in your thoughts. Anything jump out at you or you want to talk about?
Hubie?
Yeah, well, okay, on Benjamin Siegel, what I'd heard is when I worked in Chicago, some people that I don't know which guy he teamed up with originally, but they were originally protection guys for guys who used to like to beat up the Jews. And if you attacked the Jews, these guys came after you. And I think that was pretty common going back in those days.
Yeah, I'm certainly not an authority on this, but they were tough Jews, and they didn't like they didn't like what was going on in Europe, and they didn't like Father Coughlin, and they didn't like what was going on in America, and they certainly did protect some people here and there. Of course, they usually got paid for it, but they did do it. Other thoughts?
Linda, I'll unmute you. Go ahead.
Well, this is just something that I know for a fact. My father, who was born in 1913, used to talk about how he used to go ice skating and that there were the beginnings of the Jewish mafia, as they called them, or the Jewish tough guys in Chicago. And at one time, I know for a fact, he used to tell the story that they would, he said, though for the, I forget that expression, for my fate, I didn't end up being a gangster, because that's what the young men were doing at the time. They were either not going into being gangsters, or they went the straight way. And I know that my dad, they wanted his pants, and they took his pants.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so he had to give them his pants when he was younger.
Yeah.
So it was here in Chicago too. I don't know if it was
Absolutely.
only in New York, but there was an element in Chicago.
Absolutely. New York, Chicago, LA, you
Yeah.
know, the big cities for sure, where there were a lot of immigrant population. And look, you know, a lot of this comes out of poverty, right? You know, how do you make it in this country? And one of the reasons that Jews are overrepresented in places like Hollywood all comes from that as well, right? Because you know, one of the ways to make it is to make it in sports or in the arts, you know, whether it's serious arts like violin playing, you know, and things like that, or vaudeville and comedy and, you know, all that stuff. If you can't do those things, the other way to get out of poverty is to steal your way out of it,
Right.
You know, so so we see that's an ongoing thing, right? I mean, it's still the ticket out of poverty is become a sports star, you know, become a musician and make it. And if that doesn't work, you know, maybe selling drugs will, right? So
I have a question, and it's just a question that maybe somebody knows. I know the first time I went to Vegas, it must have been in the 60s when I first went to Vegas, and children were not allowed in the casinos, and it was very glamorous. But I think that the mob or organized crime was still involved in Vegas. Now, I don't know if it's still organized crime or if it's become corporations that own Vegas. I was wondering if anybody knows.
Yeah, I would say it's probably harder to tell the difference now. Right? I mean, I think there's some truth to that. You know, what Siegel is saying in the movie, and there's truth to it, is all these things we're doing that are illegal here in Las Vegas, they're legal.
Right.
So all of this money that we're getting illegally that's hard to deal with, you know, right? Remember Al Capone, when he's finally arrested and put in jail, it's for tax evasion. They can't pin anything else on him, but that they can, because he's got money that he's not declaring, right? So Las Vegas makes the mob legitimate. And it becomes a way to launder cash from other operations through Las Vegas too. So so there's certainly still illegal things going on, but all of the, you know, I wouldn't say that the mob owns Las Vegas anymore. But like I said, I think it's just harder to tell the difference, right? A couple of generations on, right? You know, I mean, we hold against certain companies, you know, that they were founded, you know, maybe even before the Nazis came to power, but then that they used slave labor. Can you ever get out from under the fact that you used slave labor, right? I mean, the American South too. I mean, right? I mean, you know, your business may be legit now, but you know, your history is tainted.
Well, all the children of the mafia, they wanted those kids to have legitimate careers. And so they sent their kids to college, and they became the bankers and the attorneys for a lot of the mafia. I know that. I took a class in that from one time, and I learned about the evolution of both the Italian mafia and the Jewish mafia.
Yeah, if you want to read more about Jews and crime in Chicago, I mean, Rich Cohen is the guy. I think he wrote a book called, I think it's called Tough Jews, if I remember correctly. So, so an interesting attempt at a history of it here. Alice?
Yeah, Rabbi, I'd like to hear your comment on this, or anybody else. I mean, it was something that went through the whole movie. The Bugsy repeating that line, the drawers, blah, 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 blah. At first, I thought it was his attempt to kind of get rid of any immigrant kind of low class accent. And then later on, I thought it was kind of to clear his head of all these horrible things he had done. And then even later on than that, I thought it was like his attempt to try to become the movie star that he wanted to become. So I don't know if it was all of the above, or I don't know.
On some level, I think it can certainly be interpreted all of the above. I mean, I read it primarily as a symbol of his intent for self-improvement, right? That he actually intends to become, right? And if you think about it, moving, the seat of operations to Las Vegas, is to become legit, right? So that's what the movie, I think, is sort of playing on. But I think you're right. It also becomes, over time, it's one of the elements of psychosis is repetition, right? And there's a thin line there between a thing that becomes kind of a mantra that calms us down, and a thing that becomes kind of a vocal tick. So it's a little of all of that, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sandy? Oh, I'll unmute you.
Hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
I've never been to Las Vegas. I'm probably one of the only people I know who's never been there. But I just realized the picture behind me is Las Vegas. I don't know if you can see it. It's Leroy Neiman. It's a numbered picture. And the people in it, you probably can't make out. It's supposed to be Marilyn Monroe and Sammy Davis, and I don't know who else, but they're all famous Hollywood stars that Leroy Neiman put. The Rat Pack, I guess.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, to be honest, I've only flown through Las Vegas. I've never been in a casino, so or seen a show or anything like that. I did. I had a layover and went to the Liberace Museum, actually. So that's kind of my whole experience of Las Vegas.
And my husband went there for a seminar, something educational, and he came back after 5 days, and I said, "Did you gamble? Did you gamble money?" He said, "No, but I found a quarter in the parking lot."
Yeah.
That's our joke with David.
Right. I lost 50 cents in a slot machine in the airport in Las Vegas. But that's it. That was all my gambling. So.
Susan, did you want to say something?
Oh, just that I've never been to Las Vegas either.
Okay.
My husband went there a few times on business, and he even said to me, "You would hate it." He said, "I'll be happy to take you there if you want to go," but he says, "You would hate it." And probably right. I've never been. I've been all over this country, but never there.
Yeah. Well, I won't rule it out. Maybe I'll go there eventually. I mean, there is a Jewish community there. Neil's telling us, and there are rabbis there, and so not so surprising that there are Jews there. Actually, I'm from watching this movie. Right, some of them are. Of course, a lot of people have moved to Las Vegas in recent years. It's become a retirement mecca in some sense. But of course, the descendants of some of these folks who, who helped build the city are still there, right? So, isn't the one of the senators from Nevada is Jewish and was a synagogue president, I think, in Las Vegas. Right? So not the one who was just reelected, but the other one. Yeah.
Let's look it up. We have Julie, Carla, then Hubie.
on that topic, for those of you that were from Legacy Sorel, you might remember Gloria Mintz. Does anybody remember Gloria Mintz?
Mhm.
I
No,
knew her well.
she taught in our religious school. She was a wonderful teacher. She was a very unique person. She was very into her Judaism, and she went to the, what is it, the UJR school in California, or someplace. She became a rabbi. And she had a congregation in Henderson, right outside of Las Vegas, for many, many years. And I understand that she's retired from that, and I think moving back to Chicago. So there was just, when you're talking about the Jewish community, we have one of our own, so to speak, that became a rabbi outside of Las Vegas.
She goes by Yocheved.
And Yocheved Mintz. And just for fun, a long time ago, Bob and I took a class with a friend of ours that was teaching, Marshall Hartman, at the JCC, about Jewish gangsters. And he had a whole stack of books. And one of the books, the title was, "And He Was Good to His Mother," or "But He Was Good to His Mother."
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it's and coming back to the text of the movie a little bit, there's a couple of details that show up near the beginning, near the end. Near the beginning in his conversation with Elliot Gould, where Elliot Gould tells him he needs $50,000 because the DA, the police, the FBI are after him. Says, these people, they're no good, says to Ben, right? And then later in the movie, when Ben's actually in jail, and he's reading the newspaper, he's talking to Mickey Cohen. And he says, what kind of people write this stuff? And and Mickey Cohen sympathizes with him and says, yeah, they have no morals, right? So I think those things about sort of what it looks like, what normal people look like to them is an interesting comment, right? And so it's kind of they're funny lines, but they're also something more than that, right? So we also have a moment in the movie which is like right out of a farce, like Down and Out in Beverly Hills. But it's also tragic. I mean, it's the daughter's birthday, right? Where he's running from room to room. He's got Meyer Lansky in one room. He's got Esta in the kitchen, and he's got the kid sitting at the table. He's running around, with a chef's hat and an apron. It's absurd, right? It's like an absurd comic moment, but it's also the disintegration of his family. It's the seeds of his destruction, right? Are right there in that moment that's played in this movie as farce, when he tells Lansky Mussolini is a dead man, and that's when Lansky says, and this is the line reading that gets Ben Kingsley the Oscar nomination, as far as I'm concerned. And he just says, "Don't repeat this to anybody." It's a remarkable scene, and so when I look back at this movie, these are some of the scenes that I remember. Later on, I think there's a scene where Virginia is sitting on the steps in the house and hearing the commotion in the other room, and the look on Annette in Annette Bening's eyes, the moment of fear in them, I think, is incredibly powerful, and does an amazing job with it. So I think it's really quite a remarkable piece of work, the use of music coming throughout. I mean, the jazz. There's a lot of songs that if you listen to the lyrics, you hear phrases like "out of my mind," and stuff like that seem to come up at the right place. The long ago and far away, I dreamed a dream. kind of comes up at the right place, so these sorts of things are really incredible details. And by the way, so it was nominated for 10 Oscars. What it won for was art direction and costume, which I mean, it's the art direction, I think, is pretty exquisite and pretty remarkable. It's interesting. A couple of scenes play out at the Los Angeles railroad station, which is the same railroad station that's been there since the 1930s. So that's not actually, they didn't have to build that set or do anything. I mean, a visit to the Los Angeles railroad station is worth it just to see the architecture of the station. So, right in downtown LA. It's a beautiful old building. So, but the movie makes good use of it and some other good settings in Los Angeles, but also, of course, uses the studio backlots very well. And, a remarkable job. But just remember that in 1991, this stuff isn't done digitally. I mean, they found all those cars and, all the things that they had to do to create this setting of Los Angeles in the 1930s. The art direction Oscar is certainly well deserved for this movie. Beautiful in its way to look at, right? So quite a piece of work. So
I think we had Hubie, then Carla.
Okay, my question, actually it's not a question, is the movie sometimes makes you think about things, and then you wonder what his family was like. What was their life afterwards? And what I read was that not the immediate family, but he had a grandson also named Benjamin, and he teamed up with some other guys, and he became I call him a gangster also, and he led that similar life, but obviously not as famous.
Yeah, well, sometimes trauma in a family repeats from generation to generation, right?
And the wife lived till 1982.
Esther?
Yeah, here she is. Wait 1 second. I looked her up. So, I mean, he, was killed in, I think, 47, but
yeah,
look, she had a long life. Oh, that's his daughter. So it's fascinating. Carla.
Just a couple of random comments with my extreme sensitivity to mental illness and stuff. I came away from the movie feeling very sympathetic towards Bugsy and definitely seeing very much the humanity of the character. At least that's how, when Ike said that the humanity of it, that's what struck me the most. And as we went for an aside about Las Vegas, the fact that Las Vegas has gone on, Ike also pointed out, to all those millions of dollars, that's not really a credit to be proud of. It took my son, I only passed through Vegas once, but my son spent a month or two there, and he came home with this overwhelming feeling of I guess what I would perceive as the epitome of the juxtaposition of wealth against poverty, because Las Vegas is actually, I guess, one big street. Perhaps it's much bigger than the day I passed through, but outside of that street is the poverty and all the people who support all those gambling enterprises that go home to poverty and as they live in the glitz of the wealth.
Yeah.
It's a pretty terrible place.
Yeah, it's kind of you and I grew up on Miami Beach, of course, and right. I mean, we lived in the part of Miami Beach where people actually lived, and Las Vegas is sort of like that, I think. I mean, there's that strip, which is the glitz and the glamour, the rows of hotels and stuff like that. And then there are these places where people just live, right? but it's sort of like Miami Beach on steroids in a way because
On
of the,
steroids, that's what I was gonna say, on steroids, it's really
Yeah.
not comparable from my perception.
Yeah. I actually thought you were probably going to talk about some of the gangsters we knew.
That I grew up with, yeah.
Yeah, right. But that's another, we'll save
Yeah.
that for another time.
Trigger Mike's daughter was a good friend of mine. Trigger Mike Coppola was a good friend. And then the LaMotta family was around the corner. I don't know if he fits exactly, Jake LaMotta, but
Yeah.
because he wasn't Jewish, nor was Coppola.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, but look, I mean, you know, the one thing about that is Luciano, of course, is not Jewish either, but he and Meyer Lansky and Ben Siegel were partners. They were friends from childhood. They were real partners, right? So that's what I think the Coen brothers movie Miller's Crossing kind of gets at this, that there is this partnership among immigrants, you know, sometimes for good, sometimes not, you know, but it's there, right? And so it's kind of there in this movie. It's not top of the surface, you know, as it is in the movie Miller's Crossing. So anyway, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Just to review, next week is Homicide, and the week after that, we'll be finishing up, and it'll be Evan Almighty and Noah together, and the Noah with Russell Crowe, right?
Yeah. And I just wanted a word about Homicide for those you know, who are tuned to these things. This is very much an R-rated movie, Homicide. Nothing we've watched up till now has language like this movie. David Mamet is famous for his vulgarity, which is a kind of a vulgar poetry. But if you can't take that, you don't want to see this one, right? So it's just a word of you know, when they put up the warning before the movie comes on, you know, that this is you know, if you I didn't count how many times the F word gets used in Homicide, but it's way up there. So if that's troubling to you, you're forewarned and you're excused if you don't want to watch it. So I will not quote it, you know, but I think it's a fascinating movie, probably deserving of more than 1 week's discussion, but I'll be interested in hearing what you think about it. So next week
We'll be the judge of that.
Make sure you get the right Homicide, because there's a lot of things that have that in the title. So you want to make sure you get the one starring Joe Montana. This one was on a strange service, right, Vanessa? This is like Freevee or something.
Oh, okay, wait a minute. Homicide. Now I'm looking it up. So it's from 1991.
Same year as this one, by the way, Bugsy, right?
Yeah.
So keywords, you're going to look for Joe Montana, you're going to look for David Mamet, and you'll get the right movie.
Right.
But Freevee, is that what it's on?
You know, you'll have to send that to me. I'm just showing it on Apple TV, and let's see what else. And on Peacock, maybe. Wait a minute. Let's see.
The flyer, we put it down. I think it.
You know where you can rent it.
I want to
Wait,
say
1 second. I think
it's a
on
free
YouTube.
site.
I got it free.
Oh.
I was surprised, and it's a great movie. I would tell all your friends, even people who aren't in the film group, tell
Right.
them all to see it, because most people don't know about it. And it's a really great movie. Thank you for including it.
Yeah, as long as language doesn't offend people, you can, you know, recommend it to people.
Right.
You know,
Oh,
this is why
it
we didn't
says-
watch it first.
It says Freevee, but you can get to it. You can watch it now. There might be some ads, but it's through Prime.
Oh,
on-
yeah, is it on?
Amazon
It
Prime.
wasn't when we started this, but
Up here, I'll just put this here. Here you go. If you have a problem, let me know.
Okay.
This week, adult enrichment is only in person, Readers Theater. You're not going to want to miss that, except for Carla, who have to fly in. And delicious lox and bagels, which I'm sure Carla would also like. All right, be well, everyone. I'll see you this week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks.